The next hour, we are actually going to be focusing more on physical health. And then the second half of the morning, you'll be spending more time with Stacy and Chris on the professional growth and professional health, and then EQ health. But Chris made a really interesting point last night in her presentation. And she said it starts with a self-awareness, right? So your EQ can advance when you're aware of self. And it's really the same thing physically. When you're aware and have some self-awareness around your physical health, you can actually improve your health, just like you can improve your EQ, just like you can improve your professional growth. So that's what we're going to focus on here today. So because you are stuck with a nurse giving this presentation, it would be really awesome if I told you to close your eyes and put yourself on a nice warm beach. Stacy's like, I'm all in, and we went to this place with a Mai Tai and the sun, but I'm gonna ask you to close your eyes and do something a little bit different here with me today. So if everyone can just take a moment and close their eyes. Think of a time when your body felt really heavy. Think of a time where you felt like your body wasn't able to do what you wanted it to do. Think of that last time that you were laid up in bed, not able to get up because your body hurt, because you weren't well, because things weren't functioning like they should. And now think of that particular day that you have in your head as you're laying there in bed. And think about how productive were you as a professional that given day? How kind were you to your family that day? How much energy did you have for self-care that day? I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. And when you go to that place of when you're not well, what kind of emotions are you feeling? Frustrated? Mm-hmm. Irritable. Disappointment. I wanted you to start by doing this because anytime we talk about something physically, there's a big emotional component to it, right? We all know the mind and body are connected. And so even though I'm talking a lot about the body here today, the reason it's really so relevant is because it has such a powerful impact on our emotions. And our physical health often can drive what we're able to do professionally. So they're all interconnected. And one of the things that I have seen make the biggest difference in people's health centers around blood sugars. As I'm talking about this, it might feel like it's twice removed for you, or it might feel like it's really near and dear to you. But I hope throughout this time together, what will resonate with you is really the importance of understanding your blood sugars and how it impacts you body, mind, and spirit, not just physically. So how many of you are familiar with continuous glucose monitors? David and Jamie and Stacy. All right. How many of you know someone with type 1 or type 2 diabetes? Like almost everybody. How many of you are worried that you might develop diabetes? Always, yeah. Well, part of my job here is to convince you that you should be worried about diabetes. But you have a lot of control in your outcome in terms of your health, in terms of your preventing disease, and the continuous glucose monitor is actually one of the best tools for that. So this is the first time that we talked about continuous glucose monitors up at the point. This was about 12, 13 years ago. And as I mentioned in my last presentation, my last position in healthcare was as Director of Diabetes Care and Endocrinology. So it's a topic that's really, I have a lot of passion around it. But I sat here with a group of physicians and nurses and dietitians, and this was the first time that we started talking about continuous glucose monitors. And the first time that they were really being used as mainstream in healthcare was about 12 years ago. And during this conversation, we could see even at that point what a game changer they were going to be for patients who were struggling with diabetes. But as we go through this presentation, what's really exciting is that it now can benefit people who just want to prevent so many different illnesses and so many different diseases. I'm gonna start with something that's gonna wake you up a little bit with this photo. Stacy's seen this before, Jamie's seen this before, but I'm gonna talk about a patient of mine who really turned my perspective around on continuous glucose monitors and the power that they have. So this is a patient that came into the ER with a diabetic ulcer, and a pretty significant one. And our endocrinologists, typically when someone comes in with a wound that's looking like there's a high likelihood of amputation, have to go in and see the patient in the ER within X amount of hours. And this particular day, our endocrinologists were all busy, they were full. They said, Christa, hey, could you go down and meet with Bob and just assess his wound and maybe get a couple of things going? So I went down and checked out Bob, and I had seen Bob on a number of different occasions, and I asked him for permission to document his story a little bit and take this picture. Because Bob also at the same time agreed to be one of our first patients that we would put a CGM on. Now, when Bob got to the ER, he had not checked his blood sugars for a while, and blood sugars checked by a finger poke only registered to about 500. When we checked his blood via a venous draw, we found that Bob's blood sugar was actually 800. So Bob's blood sugar should really not have been above 180. His goal was to be 180 or less, and here he was at 800 with a festering wound. It's not a good scenario for him. So we put on a continuous glucose monitor on Bob, and we could see here the CGM at this time was capped at about 450, 500 for a blood sugar reading, and Bob was clearly way above that, and he was that way for days, and he is in the hospital this entire time. The only time that Bob's blood sugars got to a normal range is right in here, and this is about when he arrived in the ER. Can anybody guess what might have happened right about here to right about here that changed his blood sugars?
Surgery? Fasting?
No, good guesses. Close, very close. So this is when they put Bob on an insulin drip, right here. And when he had the proper amount of insulin, of course, his blood sugars went back to normal. But the interesting thing is, as soon as they took him off the IV insulin drip and they're giving him manual injections instead, his blood sugars went right back to being really uncontrolled. And I was trying to convince the nurses, oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. I was trying to convince the nurses to look at this data versus their finger poke, because this is so much more valuable in the big scope of things and understanding what his blood sugars were doing. While Bob was in the ER with us, he looked at me and he said, hey, I'm really hungry. Can I have something to eat? And I said, well, absolutely, you can have something to eat. So I asked the nurse, his nurse, if she could get him something to eat. And this is what she brought Bob. Now remember, why is Bob in the ER? Bob's in the ER because his blood sugar is 800. And she brought him this, Oreo cookies, sandwich, applesauce, and milk. And we both just had this moment where we looked at each other, and I was like, oh, we have just failed him miserably. She's like, but Christa, he's on an insulin drip, it's fine. And I was like, it's not fine. Because now we have to undo this, or you have to undo this in, back in your families, back in your clubs, wherever this patient is coming. It will take years to undo that we just gave him permission to have that, or to eat that because he's on insulin. As I started to work with the staff and trained them more on how to use the CGM in conjunction with giving him more insulin, this within a week's time is where Bob's blood sugars got to. This is someone who came in at an 800. And these are all normal with the exception of these couple of little blips here. That was the moment where I was like, this tool is incredibly powerful. And we started to use it as much as we possibly could with every single person and patient. So Bob had type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is really that lifestyle diabetes that a lot of you probably see with your clients, family members. How many of you work with someone who has type 2 diabetes or has a family member with that? A couple of you, okay. So type 2 diabetes is really kind of a wear and tear, right? So your pancreas and your liver are your two organs that are responsible for keeping your blood sugars in check. With type 2 diabetes, like everything else in your body, it has a threshold for how much you use it, and then it's gonna say, I'm getting tired. Type 2 diabetes is that signal of like, hey, my pancreas and my liver are really tired. Anybody know someone with type 1 diabetes? And type 1 diabetes is really different from type 2. We treat them in a very similar way, but the origin of why they happen is very different. So type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune issue. So it's usually a very sudden onset where somebody suddenly becomes very sick. Their pancreas actually, for some reason, perceives that it's foreign. The body perceives that it's foreign, and the body attacks its own pancreas. And it shuts it down, and it makes it so that you have little to no insulin at all very suddenly. So blood sugars go very high, people get very sick very quick. Gestational diabetes is a temporary diabetes that people have during pregnancy. During pregnancy, mom's hormones go really high. Hormones tend to block your body's ability to use its insulin well, and then once those hormones go away, usually that resolves. These are some symptoms of diabetes. Has anybody here experienced any of these symptoms? Bob? Yeah. Me too. I've experienced like all of these at some point in time. So it's really challenging for people to go, am I just tired because I'm getting over a cold? Am I just tired because I've been working 60 hours a week? Vision changes as you get older. Your urinary patterns change. Weight loss or weight gain becomes normal as you get into menopause. All of these things happen for so many reasons, which is why so many people dismiss the signs and symptoms of blood sugar dysfunction early on. Oftentimes, if people get symptoms, I say it's a good thing. Here's on a global scale why diabetes really matters. So in 2015, there were 415 million people with diabetes. By 2040, they project that that will be 642 million people globally. Here's the US. So you can see over the last almost 20 years the increase in prevalence. And currently here in 2019, we're sitting at about the US adult population having about 14% of us having diabetes in our country. And they expect that to double by 2050. So if you don't work with somebody now who has diabetes, there's a really good chance that someday you will. It's also a really expensive disease. So certainly there are companies that make money off of diabetes, but there's also a lot of healthcare dollars spent on it. You can see 1 in 5 healthcare dollars is spent caring for people with diabetes. It's an expensive illness. The cost of it, I'm just going to go here to North America. In 2015, we spent $348 billion on diabetes, and in 2040, we will spend almost $400 billion on caring for those with diabetes. There's a real human cost to diabetes, too. A lot of people think of some of the more obvious things, but it is really linked to a lot of systemic issues in the body. So it's one of the primary causes of cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetic retinopathy, and leading to blindness and kidney disease. And it also affects the nerve pathways. The cost of insulin, for those that have to go on insulin, here's what it costs somebody to have diabetes. And you can see in the US, this green line here signifies the United States and a cost of 1 tiny vial of insulin. So for somebody who needs insulin on a weekly basis, often they're going to go through a vial of that, and that is $250 for them in the US relative to other countries. It's a very, very expensive disease to manage. Here's why I think it's such an important thing for people to be aware of, is really as more of these studies come out, it becomes more important that we understand what metabolic health implies for all of us. So this was a study out of University of North Carolina Global Public Health College, and they found that only 12% of American adults are metabolically healthy. That means 88% of US American adults are metabolically unhealthy. And you want to know what the number one marker in that evaluation is, whether you're in the metabolically healthy or unhealthy category? Blood sugars. Yep, that's the number one criteria. There's a couple others around cholesterol and blood pressure, but blood sugar is what they look at most. And in this, a lot of people want to say, well, I'm part of that 12%. I'm not in that 88%. And as we go through, I'm going to show you how even I have flipped in and out of that 88%. And I think over the course of a lifetime, most of us probably will flip in and out of that am I metabolically healthy or not state.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
What does metabolically healthy mean?
That's a great question. So metabolically healthy, you would have to look at the criteria is they look at your waist circumference and without medication. So they measure your waist circumference, they measure your blood sugar, they measure your blood pressure, and then your cholesterol level. And all of those things fit into the metabolic health profile. If those are all within the range that the medical community has decided is normal, then they consider you metabolically healthy. So a blood pressure of, say, 140 over 90 or less. blood glucose for someone without diabetes that doesn't go over 140. But they all have different parameters. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Why has this been so relevant in our current day? Well, as we've known, and we continue to see more studies like this around COVID, those who are not metabolically healthy are having a harder time recovering from many illnesses, including something like COVID. So think of this, the US, we all are seeing these statistics, the US is coming out far worse than many other countries around COVID. And a lot of that is because of our poor metabolic health in our country. So I'm just going to quickly go through this and explain a little bit how glucose and insulin works. And I'm going to try and do this in a really understandable way. But if it's too elementary, I'm sorry. And if it's too advanced, stop and go, hey, can you just answer this question like you just did, Bob? And I'll try and break it down a little easier. So glucose comes from carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, most of us know, are bread, pasta, rice, fruit. All of those contain carbohydrates, are a carbohydrate which contains glucose. So when you ingest those, your body is needing to use them as fuel. The reason that we need glucose for fuel is because it is our body's primary source of energy. Now, sometimes you can use fat for fuel, like when you're going on the keto diet, but for most people, they use carbohydrates for fuel. But when carbohydrates go into the body, your body cannot use them appropriately. It's like, if you think of carbohydrates like your gas, right? You've put the gas in the wrong tank if it doesn't go to the right place. The right place for your carbohydrates to go is your red blood cell. So the carbohydrate, the glucose from the carbohydrate comes over to your red blood cell, but it cannot get into the blood cell without a hormone called insulin. So when the carbohydrate goes into your body, it triggers your pancreas to say, hey, I need to release the right amount of insulin to match the amount of carbohydrate that, say, Ellie just ate. So Ellie's pancreas has to say, hey, this is how much insulin she needs to meet that apple. Because insulin is like the key, right? It goes over to the cell, it unlocks it, it lets the glucose in from the carbohydrate. Without the right amount of insulin, this is what happens. You get an excessive amount of blood glucose in the vessel and it collects. It cannot go anywhere. It can only stay in your bloodstream. Your body cannot use the fuel. So in essence, you've just poured a bunch of gas in your body, right? And it's trying to go to the gas tank, which is your red blood cells, so your body can use it for fuel. But if you don't have the right amount of insulin, it's not getting in the gas tank. And then you just have a bunch of free-floating gas going all over that's not fueling your body. And this heavy amount of glucose throughout your body is sludgy, it's thick, it moves slow. So, and it goes, think of your vessels, they go from top down, right? So this is affecting every single body system that it's flowing through. Has anyone ever heard of the test A1C, a lab test called the A1C? So, David, so the A1C is actually measuring how much glucose is on the outside of your red blood cell, because that's indicative that it's not going inside the red blood cell, which is indicative of the fact that your pancreas is not secreting the right amount of insulin to match the carbohydrates that you're eating. And then it collects on the outside of the blood cell and on the inside where it should not be collecting. Why does this matter? I talked a lot about diabetes, and we tend to focus on blood sugars and diabetes, but blood sugars go so far outside of diabetes. They affect absolutely everything. So people who have high blood sugar or blood sugar disruption, they are far more susceptible to infections that won't heal, even to injury. They get more skin issues, joint pain, different kinds of cancers, allergies, asthma. High blood sugars impact everything in your body because high blood sugars flow through your whole body system, every vessel, every organ it impacts. How many of you have clients, for those that are in the fitness industry, that come in and they're worried about their testosterone or their estrogen? Lucas. Did you know that insulin and blood sugar can be a huge disruptor for testosterone and estrogen? It is a huge impact. It's probably one of the biggest disruptors. So it's so hard for people. I'm a middle-aged woman and I want my estrogen to be this or my testosterone to be this. But if my insulin and my blood sugar aren't balanced, I might as well not even think about these things because they just won't work. So they are so intertwined. It's really, insulin and blood sugar impact absolutely everything in your body. So why are we having such a prevalence of blood sugar disruption in our society today? I think all of us can kind of guess a few of the reasons, right? So we are eating far more like this, a lot of packaged food, a lot of bottled food, bottled drinks. We're really sedentary when we eat. We sit a lot. And then we find ourselves in front of screens, which disrupts our hormones also. And we're working a lot of hours in front of screens more than we ever have in history, right? We're always in front of a computer, always in front of our phone. And that constantly being on can disrupt a lot of our hormones, which insulin is. So a lot of people want to just take this approach, but there's a lot of things that we have to own in how well our pancreas is working or not. This is another one. How many of you have gone up until whatever age you are and never had stress in your life? Raise your hand. Nobody, right? Like we all have a ton of stress in our life. Stress is the biggest blood sugar disruptor, and most people don't realize that. How many of you have had more stress in the last couple of years? Raise your hand. Most of us. Yeah, it's a really big deal, and I would raise my hand in that too. I'm just going to talk about one of the big things that we've all been thinking about the last couple of years and how it impacts our stress level, right? So here's just a resource from the Washington Post poll that talks about the increase in stress since coronavirus outbreak. And look at this. So this is the blue line indicative of a higher degree of stress. And everybody's like well above 50% in how much increased stress, how much this is disrupting their life. It's a source of stress, and they're worried. It's very high. Anybody know what cortisol does in your body? No? Okay. So cortisol is our fight or flight hormone. So back in the day when cavemen had to outrun tigers, you'd rely on your cortisol. Susan, you probably rely on your cortisol to get you through your endurance races. It can have a really, well, and then if you don't get it down, then it's a problem, yeah. But cortisol is great. It's part of your sympathetic nervous system, right? So it's your hormone that helps you even when you're in a cold plunge, right? Like it's your cortisol is going to elevate a little bit. It's telling your body to do something different. Like, is this comfortable or uncomfortable? And I'm going to help you manage that. In those times where you're doing something where you need to kind of take yourself up a level, your cortisol kicks in and it serves a purpose. What happens though in our day and age where our stress is so high and it's so chronic is we are constantly secreting an increased amount of cortisol, more than our body knows what to do with. And cortisol in the blood sugar insulin loop, what cortisol does is, you know how I said you eat the carbohydrate and the glucose and it needs to get to the insulin? Cortisol acts like a wall between those two, so they can't connect. So when cortisol constantly stays up, it disrupts your blood sugars. And the other thing that we see a lot is called, are familiar with insulin resistance? Cortisol is usually the biggest player in insulin resistance, causing that mid-abdomen issue for a lot of people, especially as they age. So if you see people who are carrying a lot of extra weight here, I mean, some people just genetically do, but usually the culprit for that is going to be, at the root cause of it, is going to be cortisol, a cortisol disruption, causing this whole loop to be an issue. As I was talking about that mind-body connection, so I always tell people the body keeps the score. It's really interesting when you start to look at people's blood sugars and labs, and those who have been diagnosed with diabetes, oftentimes if you sit with them long enough and hear their story, there's been some major life event for them prior to their diagnosis of diabetes. Loss of a loved one, loss of a job, big move, maybe it was even having something like a significant virus. Stress on the body usually results in the body keeping a score, and it manifests itself in some way, shape, or form. Leaders have not been exempt from this. So certainly all of those in different leadership roles, which many of you are, have probably experienced a higher level of cortisol these last couple years as you're trying to keep things going. Chuck is no exception. He seems super cool, calm, and collected, which he really actually is, I think, most of the time. But this year put everyone to the test, right? Like even leaders who are leading the fitness industry have been having definitely issues with larger amounts of cortisol. So I'm going to pick on Chuck for a little bit, and he gave me permission to. So Chuck has higher stress, I would say, than or has high stress. He also likes to have some fun. So he likes to have a beer. He sometimes likes to smoke cigars. And I said to him, I'm like, it'd be really interesting to see how your body handles all of that. You know, like you're in your 50s now, and you know, how far have you pushed your body? What's your body keeping score of at this point? So I put a CGM on him, and I just want to give you the normal numbers before we go to his. But for all of you who do not have diabetes, this would be your normal range. Normal is around 80 to 100 for a blood sugar if you poked your finger. If you're pre-diabetic, it's going to be just a little higher. And the reason that we have a little bit higher blood sugar numbers for someone who has diabetes is because we don't want to have low blood sugars if they're taking medication with their diabetes. So we often have the range just a little bit higher. So here is Chuck's continuous glucose monitor result back from 2019. And then he did just do one this last summer too, which I'll talk about a little bit. And actually, Chuck is really metabolically healthy, which was reassuring for him to see. But he did have one significant episode of blood sugar disruption. And it was here, as you can see, he had like a 12-hour period where he was sitting higher than normal. And so as I was looking at these results, and you can't see this on here, but this was a Friday night, and I was looking at this, and it was probably like 11 o'clock, and I was like, well, did you have some drinks? And he's like, no, I didn't have any drinks. And I said, well, were you coming down with something? Some kind of cold or flu? And he's like, no, I actually felt fine. And I was like, did you not sleep well that night? He's like, no, I actually slept okay. So we were kind of scratching our head, and I was like, hey, I wonder what was going on there. And then as we went back to his calendar, we realized that this blood sugar disruption happened when our daughters were playing a basketball game to get to the state championship, and they lost. They lost a game they were supposed to win, and they didn't get to the state championship. And Chuck had two daughters playing in that game, one her senior year with a big vision and goal of going to state before she left her high school basketball career. And this is what happened with his blood sugars. The whole family, he said, was stressed, was sad. She was crying. They had an ice cream party. He's like, it was just 12 hours of stress in our family. And it showed up in his blood sugars. So he's like, well, what do you do with that? And does it really matter? And I said, well, here's where it does matter. If you had this happen to you on a regular basis and you don't know how to mitigate that, or you're not aware that your blood sugars are going high, and you keep having these issues, eventually these will be your new normal. Now, if you know you're having these times of stress and you can do something about it, then you have this opportunity to correct it, right? So these blood sugar spikes don't happen on a regular basis. So when you feel stressed, what can you do to decrease your stress? Now, once his stress went away from that, he balanced out. So I don't mean to imply that he's having major issues, but he does have a high stress job. Life can be stressful. So just an awareness of the fact that his blood sugars reflect that. And that was a picture of them at the basketball game that's his daughter Ellen and Delaney. So here is his overall profile, but here you can see that his blood sugars went up quite a bit right there during this particular study. So to be fair, I'm also going to pick on myself. And that was a CGM study that we did last summer. So this is when I put on my CGM. The red indicates low blood sugar. So when I first put on my continuous glucose monitor, I was sitting here. Can anyone guess why I might have been having a lot of low blood sugars? That's a good guess. Actually, I was eating. I've worn it and done a 5-day fast, and it looked similar to that, but not this particular time. This particular time, I was actually in ketosis. I was on the keto diet. So I put on the CGM intentionally when I had been in keto for about a month because I was kind of curious what it would do. And my blood sugars, as do many people's blood sugars when they're on the keto diet, they tend to hover in the low range. But it's okay so long as they're not having symptoms of low blood sugar. I was tolerating this just fine. It had become my body's new normal, and I could do this okay. Now, someone with diabetes, you'd have to be more careful. I don't have diabetes, so I knew sitting in this 50 range was okay. I did a 5-day fast, Allison, and I wore one, and I was in the 50s and the 40s for a lot of that, and I felt it. And I was probably pushing my body a little bit to its limits because it was not happy with me. But I was like, okay, I think I'll balance this out in the end and make it. And I literally almost didn't make it. I sat at a lunch with a couple of physicians and told them I was on a day 5 of my 5-day fast. And they were kind of jerks. And they were like, great, we're going to order pancakes and orange juice. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like drooling. And what happens with your insulin, even when you see food, insulin kicks in and starts releasing. And when my blood sugars were sitting at like 50, 45, 50, and I was releasing insulin just from looking at food, I was tanking. And I looked at them and I'm like, I gotta go. And I sat in my car and I'm like, I don't even know if I should drive. So don't experiment like weird things like sometimes I do. But on the keto diet, this is what happens. And this is actually very normal for a lot of people on the keto diet.
When you fasted, were you consuming any calories via liquid or anything?
I would have bone broth and water. Yeah. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I like food. I like to eat. I don't even like it. You know, there's all these mitochondria benefits that they talk about with fasting. So I just really wanted to try it. And so I wear CGM when I did it. And it was really interesting. And interesting to me that I can sit here in keto and be fine, but my body was using fat for fuel, but not fine when I wasn't giving it anything. Everybody's, your results could be really different, but that's what I like about the CGM because it gives you that data of, helping you understand how your body's responding to whatever you're trying. When I wear them, I experiment with all kinds of things: workouts, sleep, stress, food. It's fun to see what your body does. At least for me, it's fun. 3 days later, I threw myself out of keto. So here I am hovering in kind of like the normal American diet range. This particular day, I ate probably as many carbohydrates as the average American. I did not work out. And then I went and did something here that increased my stress. It's a June evening. It is 7:41 p.m. And right here I did something that definitely elevated my blood sugar. June evening. Anyone have a guess what that might have been? That's a really fair guess. It actually wasn't that. I'll tell you what I did. I played a round of golf. I teed off for the first time in like 2 years, and I was kind of nervous. And I was like, this is so stupid. I don't really care that much about golf. Why am I nervous? But I'm teeing off, and I know people are standing around. We have a group waiting behind us. I'm the first to go, and everybody's kind of rushing me. And I'm like, I haven't done this in 2 years. Like, I need to take some time. Anyways, I got my results back later that evening. I was like, oh my gosh, I stressed myself out so much playing this game that my blood sugars went high. And so is golf bad for your health? Absolutely not. But my point is that I stressed myself out to the point of raising my blood sugars. That is what stress does to you. The other thing I really like to test when I'm wearing a CGM is beer. I really, really, really like beer. And I'm so bummed out that my blood sugars usually don't do well with beer. I test it every time, and I just keep my fingers crossed that one of these days I'm going to get the result I'm hoping for. But here's what's really happens. So here I actually went and I made an effort to eat more carbohydrates than probably I ever otherwise would. And then I happened to have a couple of beers later that afternoon, and my blood sugars went up to almost like 170, which is really pretty high. So what does all of this really mean for me in the big picture? So it tells me that I have certain things in my lifestyle that I can do very occasionally, and that's how often they have to be, if I don't want to have even greater blood sugar issues, if I don't want to develop diabetes. And sometimes I get so bummed out because I'm like, I'd really like to have a beer every week. But if I do that, in all honesty, with everything else in my lifestyle, my body's going to do this every week. So I just save these things for like special occasions. Golf, I might just give up, but beer, I'm going to keep trying. And here's something else in my history. So with my third daughter, who I had at the age of 34, I did develop gestational diabetes. And what gestational diabetes does is it kind of tells you how your body's going to respond, or your blood sugars are going to respond in a time of stress, because in essence, pregnancy is a time of great stress on the body. And I developed gestational diabetes with my third pregnancy, which is also common. The older you are when you have a child, usually the greater the likelihood of developing gestational diabetes. Here's what we don't talk about, though, with gestational diabetes. And does anyone work with the clients that are pregnant or expecting? Occasionally, Allison. This is so unspoken in healthcare. It just it's one of those things that just makes me shake my head. We don't let women know who have gestational diabetes this statistic. Length of follow-up post-delivery, here's 10 years. The incidence of developing type 2 diabetes, if you had gestational diabetes, is upwards of 70%. So once I got this diagnosis, thankfully, having known what I know just from being in the world, I knew that I had to fight this statistic, because this is like a really high incidence of that happening. And so that is the reason that I work so hard on lifestyle and take a lot of extra measures and do some deep dives with the CGM, because I did make it to 10 years and now I'm at 14 years. This is my youngest daughter. And so far I am that 30% that has not developed type 2 diabetes. But it's not easy for me. I'm a nurse. I own a lifestyle medicine wellness center. All I do is think, breathe, and eat health and wellness and preventative health. And I struggle. So I just want to have that cross translate to you, like how real the struggle is for a lot of people, right? A personal trainer taught me this, and I will tell you this in all honesty, I have learned more from the couple of personal trainers I've worked with about health than any physician or nurse that I've worked with. And I say that in front of a group of healthcare professionals and they want to throw tomatoes at me. But it's true. This is where I've learned about health. I learned about health in the gym. I did not learn about health in nursing school. I did not learn about health in the hospital. I learned it in the gym. And I had a personal trainer look at me and he's like, well, just because you're not like officially sick, you're not officially diagnosed yet, doesn't really mean you're well. And I started to look at this paradigm a lot differently. And I was like, okay, I have some strikes against me genetically and with my history of gestational diabetes. And I'm like, I can't sit very comfortable in this comfort zone because it would not take me much to flip myself over into this disease end of the model. And I want to keep going here. And to keep going here, as you keep getting older, it just takes more effort. It takes more work. Working out sucks, but so do these things. So this is what I tell myself on the day that I don't want to go to the gym, because I've seen these things and they're real. And I have some strikes against me that puts me at risk for developing these things as I continue to go through my second half of life. I love this quote from Dr. Mike T. Nelson. He's an exercise physiologist, actually from Minnesota. And he's a huge guru on metabolic flexibility. If you want to hear about metabolic flexibility, I would look up Dr. Mike T. Nelson. His point in this, he wore a CGM and his vice is Pop-Tarts. He's like, I love wearing CGMs because I get to eat Pop-Tarts and see what happens. It's like his one time he lets himself eat Pop-Tarts. But he's like, my goal in life is to keep myself so metabolically healthy that I can have a Pop-Tart every now and then, and it's not a huge deal. And he's like, that's really how life should be, right? It's getting yourself to this state of health where it's maybe a little bit of that 80-20 rule, 90-10, but where you can still do the things that you enjoy occasionally, but you have to work hard to get to that place where those things become an occasional enjoyment versus a detriment to your health. So why does the continuous glucose monitor matter so much, whether you are trying to prevent diabetes, whether you're trying to improve performance, or whether you're trying to treat diabetes, is this. So this red line shows you where someone did a finger poke. This line here tells you what someone's blood sugar is actually doing with a continuous glucose monitor. You can see if you just poked your finger at these different intervals, you would get a very different snapshot of what your blood sugars are doing versus if you wear the continuous glucose monitor, which measures your blood sugars 24/7. And this is someone who's actually poking their fingers 4 times. Have any of you had a finger poke? Do they hurt? They hurt a lot. And if you're doing them 4 times a day, that really hurts. And I'll be honest, like I would get an IV any day over a finger poke. Like I run from finger pokes and I'm a nurse. And I'm like, can we just do this IV? They're painful for people. And we often ask people to poke their fingers multiple times a day, especially if they have diabetes. And that's challenging for people. So the continuous glucose monitor takes that away. There's another look for somebody. These are the spots where they checked their blood sugars. This is what the continuous glucose monitor actually showed that their blood sugars are doing. It's a really great visual snapshot. Here's someone's A1C of 7.5, which is about a 3-month average of blood sugars. When we're working with someone who has diabetes, this is actually a good range. We like to see A1Cs around 7. For all of you without diabetes, it would be ideal to have a A1C of 5.7 or less. Yet when you put on the person's CGM, their blood sugars are still really hovering always above the range. But you would not see this if we just relied on this test. If we got this test back, we'd be like, oh, you're doing fine, everything's great. With the CGM, we could actually see that they're sitting at too high of a range, and we'd like to see it just a little bit lower. So everybody gets a CGM today, which I know can be as concerning as a cold plunge, but let me tell you what it's not. I do not have to put it in like this. It is not a microchip in your brain. And I cannot track how many times you stop at McDonald's. That's up to you if you want to tell as whomever how often you're going through fast food. Here's what the CGM actually is. It is a very small sensor that is injected into the back of your arm most commonly. And then there's a little teeny tiny catheter tip that sits in your interstitial fluid, which is just underneath your skin. And it reads your blood sugars in your interstitial fluid. It looks like this on the back of your arm. Have you ever seen anybody wearing these? Yeah. Sometimes you can wear them on the abdomen, especially if they're supposed to be communicating with an insulin pump. But for all intents and purposes of what we're doing today, we're going to put it on the back of our arms. And here are those normal ranges again, if anybody just wants to glance at those or take a picture of those. These are the normal ranges, what's recommended, whether you're fasting, you just ate, or 3 hours after eating. We do not use CGMs. I sure can.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We do not use continuous glucose monitors in healthcare as a preventative tool, which it makes me want to beat my head against a wall. We wait until someone has diabetes, usually on insulin, and then we give them a continuous glucose monitor so they can see what their blood sugars are doing. And myself and a number of other healthcare professionals are really trying to rally to push this forward into the preventative realm. So right now, people who have a diagnosis of type 2 or type 1, if their insurance covers it, they can usually get a CGM paid for by their insurance. If you want to do this on the preventative side of things, CGMs will cost you anywhere from this one, which everybody will get today. These are about $250. This is an Abbott. This is a Dexcom CGM. These cost $1,500 out of pocket. So that is how much it costs for about a 7 to 14 day window of seeing what your blood sugars do 24/7. But in other countries, these are sitting at Walgreens on the counter, but they are not in the US yet. And I think we're probably at least a decade away from that happening. But my hope is that someday these can be picked up by everybody and anybody, because we should be helping people understand what their blood sugars are doing long before they are requiring insulin. We have a great lifestyle algorithm in healthcare. This is when someone comes in with blood sugar disruption. This is what we're supposed to go to. This is page 1 of the American Academy of Endocrinology algorithm. I so rarely see us talking about these things in healthcare. Instead, we go right to these things. We are more consumed with the algorithm of what medication can we put someone on. So we really need lifestyle medicine advocates such as yourself who can help people make a lot of changes here. This is really complicated. There's a lot of reasons, time, consumer demand. There's all kinds of different insurance coverage of what we can work on with healthcare. But lifestyle is really, really powerful for blood sugars. Here's a head-to-head study that was in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 2002, where they put one of the most commonly prescribed drugs as a first line of defense for blood sugar issues, metformin, along with lifestyle measures. And in the end, the lifestyle changes provided greater results than the metformin, the drug that we tend to put everybody on. And yet we still don't talk about lifestyle measures in healthcare. We need people who talk about lifestyle more and more and more. Here's the other cool thing that's happening with continuous glucose monitors. They're now being used in athletes because they improve performance. If you understand how your body is fueled, you can perform better. If you understand what the fuel you're putting in your body is doing to benefit or hurt you, you're going to have better results. And the really exciting thing about both of these are two of probably the biggest continuous glucose monitors on the market today, is they're actually making a sports model. There's an article, I think, in your journal here that Jamie made that talks about that. This new sports model's continuous glucose monitor that's coming out. It will have different parameters, and it won't have all the bells and whistles as these guys, but it's going to be used for performance reasons, and they're finding really profound results. One of these articles, it was a biker who was wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and they found that he was struggling at these certain intervals during his long bike rides. And after he wore a continuous glucose monitor, they realized that he was tanking his blood sugars to like 50. He wasn't fueling up enough before he did these long bike rides. So he was really struggling at certain intervals. And once a nutritionist or a personal trainer could work with him on his fuel sources kind of throughout his endurance ride, he felt better, he performed better, and he had much better results. Here's something else that's really interesting about metabolic health. There are a number of different studies being done on cold exposure. And guess what we're all doing this afternoon? We're going to be exposed to the cold. So there are, I think, gosh, I looked at PubMed, and I think there's over 50 studies where they show exposure to cold and cold plunges improves metabolic function. Here's a couple more if they interest you. So this is Dave and Chuck wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And they wanted everybody here to be able to have the opportunity to try one. So I do have one for everybody to apply if you would like to. I have a few rules that I just want to go over because they will make your study really long or really short. This is the continuous glucose monitor sensor sitting on my sports bra. Because I've told, I say this a million times to people when they get these on. I'm like, here's a couple things you want to be really careful about. When you take off tight clothing, like a sports bra, it is really easy to rip out the sensor. And I literally had just finished saying this to someone like 2 hours before I went and did it myself. So this happens a lot. Don't feel bad if it happens to you. It happens to me, but I'm just saying it now that if you can be really careful when you take off tight clothing, that will keep your sensor on longer. I also get the question of, can you fly with these sensors? Absolutely. The TSA is so used to seeing these, there will be no issue. You can get through security, you can get through the x-rays, no problem. Can you swim with these? You can. They do advise that you don't stay 3 feet underwater for longer than 15 minutes if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor. Otherwise, yes, you can enjoy a brief 15-minute swim or a cold plunge. Only 15 minutes? Well, and here's what I always tell people. Okay, this is what they've studied, right? So some of the things that we do, like cold plunges, I was saying this to Jamie. I was debating a little bit if we should apply these before or after the cold plunge. There's a lot of things they just haven't studied. And I would say that one has been studied to some degree, but you can test it. I mean, you can try this out and see if you can swim 30 minutes and get out and be fine. You know, there's no problem in testing it. They say with these, don't go in the sauna. Well, almost everybody I put these on, because I've done about 200 case studies on the preventative side of things, they're going in the saunas. They're taking longer swims. They're doing things that kind of fall without of the scope of recommendations because they just haven't tested it. So feel free to test it.
Why it'll just stop working?
Yes, sometimes you will get disruptions, it will stop working, or you'll see this lapse in time where it's just not reading, and then it will pick back up, maybe like say an hour after you get out of the water. It's kind of that same thing too with cold plunges. Every now and then I'll see a disruption in someone's continuous glucose monitor results. If that happens to you, don't worry. It will pick back up eventually. It will, within an hour usually it will kick back in. So, who wants to try a continuous glucose monitor? Awesome. All right, good. Anybody want to be a volunteer in terms of getting their first one put in right now in front of everybody? Stephanie, you want to? Okay, great. And I'm going to, Jamie, would you mind passing these out?
So these are just a one-use thing when you're telling us the price of them. It's just a one-use.
It is. Ellie, I'm going to see if you'd pass that around. It is a one-use. So Karen, it's a good question. The sensors, depending on which ones you get, last for 1 to 2 weeks. The sensors that everybody here is going to be getting can last upwards of 14 days. I will say this is probably a more active group than the average person that wears the sensor. So it could be that your sensor might come off at day 10. Every now and then that happens. It kind of depends on how much sweat, how much, different friction has happened above and around the sensor, how much swimming. I mean, there's a couple of variables in there, but these should last upwards of 10 to 14 days. Yeah.
And you just wait for it to fall off?
And then you take it off at 14 days. Yes. So it's all really good questions.
So once you kind of see like what your range is,
Yeah.
and your normal, it's just something you do like every 2 years, just to see what your lifestyle and your body's doing.
That is such a good question. Thank you for asking that. So here's something I'll tell you guys. Physicians don't tend to prescribe these unless someone's on insulin. But there are so many physicians that if you ask them to prescribe you one, they will prescribe you one. And you just have to know that you'd have to cash pay for it. There are also companies out here now that are doing this. Most of them are working with people who do not have diabetes. So NutriSense is actually a company now where you can get continuous glucose monitors. And they, I think, have it where you work with a dietitian. So they'll give you one of these and then you're working with a dietitian. It's part of their program. I personally would say, depending on what you find, you get to try one now, right? If you find that you're having a few blood sugar disruptions in there, I recommend that people wear them at least twice a year. If you don't have any blood sugar disruptions, I think it's a really good thing to wear once a year because blood sugars change, right? Life changes, our health changes, our lifestyles change. So I think once a year is a really good, just kind of like, hey, check in, how am I doing with this? So that I don't end up with all of the other ththings that we just talked about. If you are someone who has diabetes, then oftentimes people wear these continuously. They never stop wearing them. They just keep wearing them. So that's a really good question. Nicole, I know you asked too, do they just fall off? And it's a good question. At 14 days, if yours is still on, you'll just gently peel it off. That's all you have to do. Literally, just peel it off, throw it away, and then you're done. So what you're gonna do is sync these sensors to your phones because now the technology has advanced where there's an app. So you can do this, you can check everything right from your very own phone. Did everybody have a chance to download the app? Okay, perfect. If not, feel free to take a moment to download that. It's in, yeah, thank you, Allison. All right, and Stephanie, if you are willing. Okay, so I'm going to show you how this is done with Stephanie here. I'm going to mention a couple of other quick things. I'm going to pass around something called Skin Tack. This is like a liquid Band-Aid, so it helps the sensors stay on a little bit better. You do not have to use one of these. If you have really sensitive skin to different tapes, I would actually say don't use this. But I put this on as part of the process of the continuous glucose monitor, which, are you okay if I do that with you, Stephanie? So I'll show you how that works, but I'm just gonna pass these around. What you do is you alcohol swab, let it dry, then you rub this Skin Tack on, and then you put the sensor on. And this just serves as kind of another measure of stickiness for your sensor. Do you have a t-shirt or tank top on in your shop? Do you? Would you be comfortable? Just even a t-shirt or tank top? It might be easier. Okay.
Yeah. Are you ready for me now?
I'm ready for you now, yeah. If you're ready, I'm ready. And yep, just one. Yep, you got it.
Do you recommend right or left, depending on?
Another really good question. So Stephanie just asked, do you recommend right or left arm? And it does not matter. It's whatever you prefer. It can go on either one. You know, the only thing I'll say, I've knocked them off. This sounds so silly. Like I'm right arm dominant. So I tend to just like bump into things more with my right arm, and I knocked one off one time, just knocking into a wall, which sounds really coordinated of me. But there is some advantage maybe to being on your non-dominant arm, but it doesn't really matter a whole lot unless you're doing really crazy things with your dominant arm or hand.
If you're somebody, if you're just getting used to this, like, maybe once a year, it's not like as often as you used to.
Yeah.
Like, just do some normal behavior, not testing like, ooh, I want to see what this does or that does. Just normal.
Such a good question. So if you are going to study this for 10 to 14 days, honestly, I would do a couple of your best days. Like, this is my best self. This is me trying really hard. This is like when I feel my best. And then a couple of your days are like, this is like Christmas time. Like, I'm going to challenge it a little bit. And I'm going to see what happens when I eat the extra, piece of cake or the extra piece of pie, or if I don't work out a day or two. And the other thing that's really interesting is testing workouts is so phenomenal. A lot of times when you're doing HIIT workouts, your blood sugars are probably going to peak to their highest. So you have to look at how quickly they also come down, because there is relevance to that. It's okay if things go high occasionally when you're doing healthy lifestyle behaviors, as long as you see them come down. Now, I've worked with endurance athletes and I'd say like significant weightlift competitors. And when they wear them and their blood sugars go high, they aren't doing things in between to mitigate, and then they stay high, and that's a problem. And that actually, you'll see a lot of people who do like Ironmans and really like just long endurance competitions, and they end up having major blood sugar problems in the long run. if they don't mitigate things in between. Like do things like take a walk every now and then, do a meditation, listen to some music that you like, but things to bring your stress down. So it's really interesting to test different workouts. Yoga, that's a really interesting thing to test too, especially for someone who's used to doing like really high intensity things and then go do yoga. Look at the difference between the two and what it does to your blood sugars. It's a really good question, Karen. I would say do a couple of your best days and a couple of your worst days. And it's really awesome to give people permission to like live their worst self, right? Like go eat everything you can.
But only on that day.
Yeah. Well, yeah, pick a couple days. Yeah, and then just leave it at that. Like, don't be like, well, this nurse told me to live my worst life. So, all right.
Can I ask a quick
Yeah.
question? Is there, so you mentioned just as long as you see it drop quickly, is there more to interpreting what we see in there? Like, is there something from the bottom side of, do we want it to come back up quickly?
Yeah.
Or, how do we interpret the results when we get them?
That's a really good question. And what I want to say to everybody here is my number and my email is in the journal. And I also have a card I can hand out to you. If you are doing this for the next 10 days and you're looking at the results and you're like, okay, this is a little problematic to me. I'm not sure how to troubleshoot this, or this is concerning to me. I am so happy to hop on a 30-minute hour call with you and go through your results, and we can troubleshoot things together. So don't feel like you're, stuck trying to self-interpret everything, because there is a science to it a little bit, and it takes some time looking at the data to go, okay, how does this work for me? But the longer you do it, the more you do it, the better you get at interpreting your own data and helping it make sense. So generally speaking, if you have a spike like I did with golf, if we go back to that slide, you can see I came down pretty quick. You just want to see yourself coming down to within that normal range within a half hour of the episode. You saw in Chuck's, his sustained for like 12 hours, but then the rest of his days were fine. So I guess, what it said to me is if you're having a period of more episodic, acute, like sudden stress, if it lasts a little bit longer because it's something a little bit more significant, that's okay. As long as within a 12, 24-hour period, you go back to your baseline. But if it's just something like, I swung my golf club and was stressed out because people were watching me and, I didn't hit the ball, that should resolve in a half hour. If I'm holding on to that for 12 or 24 hours, it's telling me something more. Yeah, but that's a good question.
You'll know after it's bullet lunch.
So everyone should have an alcohol swab in their box. So if you want to go ahead and take that out, we're going to do this all together in conjunction while I'm doing this with Stephanie. Yes, absolutely. So pick your arm, and you want to get to the very back of your arm here. So I'll show you on Stephanie. So kind of right in this area here, but you're going to be reaching it and putting this in yourself. So kind of right here in this back tricep area. Yep. Nope, that's good. You can kind of go anywhere within this window here. So once you have that kind of spot marked on your arm, then you want to take your alcohol swab and just kind of clean that area.
Do I need to relax it?
Yeah, you can go ahead and relax, yeah. Thank you for volunteering too. I appreciate that.
Forget this way. I couldn't screw it up.
Kind of right in here, Ellie. Okay. And then for those of you that are going to use the skin tack, once the alcohol's dried, it takes about 30 seconds, and you can go ahead and take your skin tack swab out and rub that over the same area. And while that's drying, I'm going to show you the other two pieces that you have in your box. It's a little sticky. The skin tack is a little sticky. This is actually the sensor. So this is the sensor that will actually end up staying inside your arm, your skin. This is the application. This is the applicator, okay? Sensor, applicator. So you'll need both. Pull out both once you're done with your alcohol swab and your skin tack. And you're going to start by first taking the foil off of the sensor. So peel back the foil on the sensor. And then you should see this.
Are you cleaning more on your bicep or your shoulder?
More on the back of your arm here, like on your tricep. Yeah, back there. As comfortable a spot where you can feel like you can reach well. So everyone have the foil off on their sensor there. Okay. Then you're going to take your applicator and twist these two pieces off, pull them apart. Now, on this blue piece, do you see kind of this middle center line here that has a distinct opening? It's just the one center line. You're going to want to match that up to the center line here on the gray sensor. Okay, and then you're going to click those together. Oh, perfect. Listen to that. Everyone just got that? That was a great sound. Okay, so click those together. Okay, everybody got that part? Anyone need help? Did you get it, Nicole? Yeah, okay.
Click it.
Yep, and then click it. You got it. Awesome. Okay, now you're going to pull them apart. Okay. This you can set down. Okay, the base of the applicator you can set down. And this top part, and for those that are needle phobic, don't look. For those that want to see, sorry Ryan, I should have said that before.
Pass out.
I can do it. I can do it for you, Ryan. If you don't want to see it, I can do it. Okay. So what I want to tell you, the needle does not stay in your skin, okay? You inject the sensor in with a needle, and then the needle retracts, and what stays in your skin is a little catheter tip. Okay, so the needle's not staying in your skin. And I will tell you, I have done so many things with needles. This is the least painful thing I've ever seen anybody do, including giving to myself, including giving it to others. I have not had anybody cry yet. Maybe Ryan might be my first. But so far, so good. So it's really truthful. It'll feel like a mosquito bite at best. But watch, I'll give it to Stephanie, and she can be the one to tell you if I'm telling you the truth or not. Okay, so. She's like, you're telling this person. Oh, is she? Ryan, we might need you. Okay. Can you just cry a little, just to make it fun?
If I do it too early,
yeah.
I know.
Okay, so you're gonna take this, just wait till I do it with Stephanie. I'm just telling you now how this goes. So you're gonna take it and hold it on the gray base. The blue part is gonna go to the skin. I'm gonna put it back to where I wiped the skin tack and the alcohol here. And I'm gonna press firmly down, okay? And then I'm gonna push it in. It's done. That's it. And then I gently pull this off, and the sensor is now in Stephanie's arm. And it's as easy as that. Mm-hmm. Did that hurt?
It feels like somebody just flicked you.
That's a good way to, that's a good
just a
analogy.
flick.
Just a flick. Yep, okay.
Somebody else go, yeah.